Hey, hello again, everyone. Last time we looked at the Constitutional Convention and particularly the differences that the states had to overcome in order to create our union. So remember, the key word there was compromise. They had to compromise in order to come up with the Constitution that we know today. So today we're going to be looking at the structure and the principles behind the United States Constitution. Let's see what they are. First, let's remember that the United States Constitution was created by a nation that had undergone two very distinct experiences. One, the tyranny of King George III, which created the American Revolutionary War and the need to escape his control. And then we had the Articles of Confederation, a reaction to that tyranny, which created a weak and ineffective government. For the new United States, the new Constitution's goal was to be a balance between the two forces, strong and weak central government. Not too strong, but not too weak. What they created was a very simple and brief Constitution. It was it very intentionally did not spell out every detail of our government, and it has been described as a skeleton or as a framework for American government. Future generations have been left to interpret how that government is meant to apply to them in their situations. This was done intentionally. So it's intentionally vague. It can be interpreted. Now, you may you may hear people say they have a strict interpretation and a more loose interpretation. You know, strictly speaking, those followers are going to say, if it doesn't say that in the Constitution, then we're not going to allow it to happen. And the looser interpretation is going to say, well, if you believe this to be true, then this should also be true. Now, within the Constitution, there are three separate and distinct parts. The very beginning is called the preamble. The preamble is just a fancy word for introduction, and it is the first part of that Constitution whose purpose is to explain the purpose of the U.S. government. The preamble explains why we have a government, and there are six purposes which are explicitly outlined in that preamble. It reads, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Therein listed are the purposes of government: a more perfect union, to establish justice, domestic tranquility, better known as order, common defense. If we need to defend ourselves, we need to have a military, general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We're the posterity. That is our children and their great great grandchildren. The second part of the Constitution is known as the Articles, and this is really the body and the framework of the Constitution itself. The Articles of the Constitution. Now, the first three articles are what created our government. They created the Congress, the presidency, and the judiciary. So the three branches of government. Articles 1, 2, and 3. Within those articles, they outline the jobs and responsibilities of each branch. Later on, the sixth article will explain that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and that the unit that the federal government has to follow the Constitution and do so, the state. Excuse me. Later on, the sixth article will explain that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and that the unit that the federal government has to follow the Constitution, and so do state and local governments. This is the idea of federalism. There's also something called the Supremacy Clause. Now, this was put in uh, because of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. So, Article 6 states that there are three items are the supreme law of the land. So, first and foremost is the Constitution. Secondly, is the laws of the national government when consistent with the Constitution. And then, lastly, treaties which can only be made by the national government. And so, this got rid of all that conflict of what laws were supposed to be supreme to everything else. And at the end of the day, the idea of federalism, the federal government is supreme. So if you have a law about on taxes by the federal government, and you have a law concerning taxes in the state, the federal government law is going to trump the state laws. In the fifth article, they explain how the Constitution can be amended. And it's very important that we have a Constitution that can be amended and changed because times change and we expect from our government changes as well. So, 27 times in our history, that's how many amendments there are 27 amendments. Uh, 27 times in our history, the Constitution has been changed, although 10 of those were done in the first year, and that is better known as the Bill of Rights. Now, the founders wanted this, and they wanted it intentionally. They wanted it to be able to change, but they also wanted to make it difficult to change. They didn't want it to change too much or too easily, so they made it a very challenging process, one which we'll get into in a later lesson. Now, the major principles of our government. Wait, that's the wrong principle. That's the wrong principle there. Here we go. The major print. There we go. Different spellings of principle for two different words. So make sure we're talking about the right one. Uh, there are several principles of the American government which need to be carefully protected, and they are sometimes known as popular sovereignty, federalism, separation of powers, the supremacy clause, checks and balances, enumerated powers, reserved powers, necessary and proper clause, judicial review, and overall the idea of limited government. So let's take a look at the first one here. And that the first one is called popular sovereignty. Basically, that just means rule by the people, and it means what it means in the United States. And what it means is that in the United States, the people rule, and our government is not free to act without the authority of the people that they govern. That is, we will vote members into government, and they will act with our authority. If we do not like what they do, we don't vote for them the next time. So don't complain about government. Go out and vote. You can make those changes if you go out and vote. Federalism is the next one. This is the basic idea of sharing government powers between central and regional governments. Here in the United States, we have a national government and we have 50 state governments, and they all share a degree of power. Now, the federal government, as you know, is in Washington, D.C., and each state has its own state capital, or its own governor, or its own legislature, or its own court system. Now, there's something also known as reserved powers. Powers that are not directly granted by the Constitution are called reserved powers, and those reserved powers are reserved for the states. And examples of the reserved powers are regulate interstate commerce. So that means in throughout the one state, administer elections, protect public welfare, health, morality, and every state has those functions. Think of it as the local level where the national government has control at a national level. So even though there is a presidential election, there are also state elections too. Now, the separation of powers, which we've already discussed, this was Montague's Montesquieu's idea for weakening the power of government. In our system, we divided our government into three branches. We do that with our three articles. We have an executive branch, we have a legislative branch, and we have a judicial branch. With their powers divided up in this way, no one branch can become so powerful that they dominate our government. Well, that is probably in theory anyway. Checks and balances is another limitation to our government's powers. It's a way to keep any one of those branches from potentially becoming too powerful. Each branch has some power and some authority to limit the powers of others, and therefore leave the three branches of government in some sort of balance. So, a really relevant example of this is, the impeachment of President Trump. The House has the power to impeach, to bring the charges. The Senate acts as uh, the jury. The Chief Justice was the presiding judge, and so all three of those uh, try to limit the power of each branch. Many would argue today that this balance is off. The presidency and the executive branch is too powerful. If you want to see that changed, I guess then the best way to do that is to vote. But I've said this before. No one could foresee the power of the presidency. The framers never intended for the president to be this powerful. Then we got something called the enumerated powers. The enumerated powers, also called the express powers or explicit powers or delegated powers of the United States Congress, are the powers granted to the federal government of the United States. So most of these powers are listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. So, here's some examples of that. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, to borrow on the credit of the United States, to regulate commerce with foreign nations, to coin money. Remember, in the Articles of Confederation, each state had their own money, to establish post offices and post roads, to declare war. That's a big one. You know, to raise and support armies. So, these are all explicit, expressed, enumerated powers that the national government has. This is within their domain. This is within their territory. So these are powers that are delegated or enumerated or expressed or explicitly held by the United States Congress. Now, there's another thing called the necessary and proper clause. Sometimes this is known as implied powers or even the elastic clause. Uh, you know, the necessary and proper clause enables Congress to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. So let me give you an example. So the Congress has the power to collect taxes, and so within their powers, so implied powers, they created the Internal Revenue Service. And so the Internal Revenue Service is nothing in the Constitution that mentions the Internal Revenue System, uh, but Internal Revenue Service, uh, but that was created by Congress because it was necessary and proper. So they needed to have an organization that dealt with the collection of income tax or taxes. And so they came up with the IRS, Internal Revenue Service. And so, that is an extension of Congress's power to collect and levy taxes. And so that is, the necessary and proper clause. They call it the elastic clause because it's very flexible. It can bend, and so Congress can do a lot of things that which allow it to carry out its functions. All right, so you have this other concept here known as judicial review. Now, judicial review, this means that the federal court system has the power to declare that the actions of government are unconstitutional. So that means, if a state passes a law, for example, and people complain that this law is unfair, someone may be able to bring it before the Supreme Court, and they can decide if this law is constitutional. In other words, does it does it not um, go against the Constitution? So if it's unconstitutional, that means it's broken the rules. It's in conflict with the Constitution, so it is unconstitutional. So, this is one of the checks that our judicial system has, but it's a very important one and worth discussing separately. So, basically the idea here is that all laws be something written to govern just your town or your state, or the entire government has to be in line with the U.S. Constitution. The federal court system has the power to determine which laws are constitutional and which are not. And the Supreme Court has the final say. So, judicial review, they take, they look at individual cases. There's going to be a few cases coming up that are really going to, bring some unhappiness, I think. That brings us to the all-encompassing view of limited government. Whenever you're talking about checks and balances and separation of the branches, that is all under the idea of limited government. The founding fathers were afraid that government would become too powerful, so they were more concerned about this than the alternative weak government. So they put in place all those structural limits which we have just talked about: checks and balances, federalism. But they also added, very shortly after the Constitution was written, the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights was a response to the anti-federalist pressure, saying that there was not enough freedoms guaranteed in the Constitution. So the very first Congress passed the 10 Amendments to the Constitution, and that they serve to protect both individual and states' rights. So next time we will look at the three branches of government. So thank you for watching.